Life doesn't always go as planned, right? I mean, sometimes things don't work out because of the decisions that other people make, and we're hit by the fallout of their poor decisions. And sometimes things don't work out because of the poor decisions we've made, and we have to live with the negative consequences of our poor choices. But either way, the question is, what do you do when you realize that your plans, your goals, your dreams won't come true? And if you're a Christian, it's really difficult, because oftentimes we feel like God has promised us certain things. Like, I got this verse, I got a verse, and I believe this verse promises me that this dream will come true. But then circumstances get all mixed up, and suddenly you realize it's not gonna happen. And sometimes it's hard to know what to do with God and what to do with your faith at times like that. And today we're going to look at a sad season in David's life, where King David is sitting on the back of a donkey, and he's headed out of Jerusalem, running for his life for a second time, and it occurs to him that none of what he hoped for is going to happen. What he dreamed of, it's not coming true. In fact, he realizes it's because of his own bad choices that it can't come true. But this is so important, because David is saying, God, here are my plans, my hopes, my dreams. Here's what I hoped you would want for my life. This is how I hoped your promises for my life would turn out. But Lord, I surrender all this to you. And God, I'm trusting you. You take it all and do with all of that whatever you want, and do with me whatever seems good to you. That prayer, it's like a prayer. It's what's going on in his heart. God, do to me whatever seems good to you. I hope that echoes in your mind this week, because at this point, David had lost his world. He had lost his identity, but he did not lose confidence in God. His entire world is upside down. He knows that his own sin has caused him to lose his family and his position, but he does not lose faith in God. He doesn't reject the law of God. He doesn't consider himself above the law of God. He sees himself as a flawed man, and he is grieving at this moment. You see that down in verse 30, where we see that as he walks up the road to the Mount of Olives, he's weeping. And that's not self-pity. He's rightly grieving over his sin. He knows deep down in his bones that everything that's happening now is the result of his sin. He knows Dathan's prophecy is coming true, and he's deeply and rightly grieved by that. But again, David never lost sight of the fact that he knew he was simply a king, but God is the king. And David lost his world, he lost his identity, but he didn't lose confidence in God. He chose not to abandon God, even though it felt like to David that God had abandoned him. He was like, I'm not going to go to war with my son. I'm not going to risk the city. I'm not taking the ark of God with me. This isn't about me. God put me in this place right here, right now, and I'm trusting him to do to me whatever seems good to him. And David leaves the city, and he leaves the ark. Absalom shows up at the city. He takes the city without a fight. And in order to make a "there's no turning back now" statement, he takes his father's 10 concubines that were left behind to take care of the palace. He takes them up on the roof of the palace. He pitches a tent, and in plain sight of everyone in Jerusalem, he sleeps with each one by one. Now, by the way, this is the same rooftop from which David's sin with Bathsheba began. Same rooftop that David saw Bathsheba. And it is the fulfillment of the prophecy where Nathan had told David that God had said to him, I'm going to give your wives to another man right before your eyes, and he'll go to bed with them in public view. What you did in secret, I will make happen to you in public. So David and his entourage leave the city. He hears that Absalom is coming after him. He realizes he has no choice but to fight his own son to meet him in battle. He divides his soldiers up into 3 groups, puts a different commander over each group, and then he gives them all a very specific, explicit instruction. He says, when you catch up with Absalom's army, and when you catch up with Absalom, my son, for my sake, be gentle with Absalom. Like, I realize this is war. I realize it's going to be chaotic, but if there's any way to spare my son's life, I want you to spare his life. And all the troops heard the king's orders concerning Absalom. And David's generals, they insist that David don't join him in battle, so he doesn't go with them. He stays behind. And the text tells us that the battle didn't take place on an open plain. It took place in the forest of Ephraim. And we're told it was a bloody battle. The text says 20,000 men died that day. Those men died as a consequence of David's sin. Sin splatters. Eventually, Absalom is caught by his hair hanging in a tree, and instead of bringing him back unharmed like David had commanded, Joab runs him through 3 times with a sword, and then his 10 armor bearers take turns stabbing him. And they bury him in an unmarked grave and covered with stones. When Absalom's army hears that he's dead, they stop fighting, they all go home. When David hears that Absalom is dead, he mourns the death of his son. So deep was his mourning that his own men, his own soldiers, were afraid to celebrate the victory. And David returns to Jerusalem as king, but his world would never be the same. And 9 years later, he dies at the age of 70. There was no happily ever after ending to this story. Now, here's a graphic I put together to show how the negative consequences of David's sin play out. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but these are the things I've talked about. How his sin with Bathsheba and Nathan's prophecy, he goes from Ammon's sin with Tamar, Absalom's murder, that's Bathsheba and Uriah, Absalom's rebellion. Absalom wins the hearts of the people, marches on Jerusalem. He runs for his life. I didn't get to this part of the story about Ahithophel, but he was one of David's most trusted spiritual advisors. He turns tail, goes over to Absalom, really of a mess of a story. Absalom sleeps with David's concubines. Absalom's defeat and death. Chapters 13 to 18 are the story of how 2 Samuel 11 and 12 played out, Nathan's prophecy. Now I want you to walk away this morning with David's words ringing in your ear. He says, if the Lord sees fit, he will bring me back to see the ark and the tabernacle again. But if he says, I find no pleasure in you, then I'm ready to accept that. Let him do to me whatever seems good to him. God, do to me whatever seems good to you. Now, what I want you to see is that David, with all his flaws and faults and failures, that David, as he's reaping the negative consequences of his sin, I want you to see that David never lost his confidence in God. Not when things didn't go his way and it was somebody else's fault, like back in the days of crazy King Saul, and not even when things didn't go in his way and it was his own fault. But in all of that, he never lost his confidence in God. Now, I don't know about you, but maybe you've been daydreaming or your mind's wandered off somewhere else. I want you to listen to the next thing I'm going to say because this is a huge, huge takeaway. Simply put, the foundation of your faith is not answers to prayer. The foundation of your faith is not everything going your way. The foundation of your faith is not the happily ever after ending you hope for or dream of. In fact, it's always a mistake, even though we all tend to do this, it's always a mistake to wrap your faith in God around the fulfillment of your dreams or even the answers to your prayers, thinking that when my dreams come true, God is good, but if they don't, I don't even know if I believe in God anymore. Listen, when your dreams don't come true, when they can't come true, when your prayers don't get answered the way you hope, when your life doesn't go as planned, when your life feels out of control, that says nothing about the presence or the goodness or the faithfulness of God in your life. It says nothing about God's presence and his activity in your life. And David, I think, of all the people in the Old Testament, would be the quickest to remind us that when we feel forsaken, we're mistaken. When you feel forsaken, you're mistaken. Because to assume that when circumstances don't go our way or when our dreams can't come true, to assume from circumstances that God is not real or that God is not present, that's a serious mistake. And David would tell us, don't make that mistake, because through all the highs and lows I've been through all the ups and downs I've been through, I know that God was with me and for me. And we see glimpses of this. Oh, I wish I could give you more illustrations of how this comes out in the story. It's all through this story, and we see it all through the Psalms that David wrote during this time in his life. I mean, the 10 Psalms that we read, like Psalm 30 through 40 something, just read those again with this history lesson in mind, and you'll see David's heart setting on the fact that he's basically saying, I know I've sinned. I grieve over my sin. My life is a mess. My enemies are against me, but God is with me and for me, even when my life has fallen apart. Now, do you know what God promised you? God made a covenant promise. His promise is to never leave you or forsake you. His promise is that I will always be with you and I will always be for you. Now, how does that look? Let me tell you how I tend to interpret that promise. To me, it looks like this. If God never leaves me or forsake me, that means I'm going to be healthy. It means my kids are going to be healthy. It means my marriage will be heavenly bliss. It means that when my kids grow up, they'll do the things that I envision them doing. It means I'll have a great job and a fulfilling career and things will just be great. That's how I interpret God being with me and for me, never leaving me or forsaking me. But do you see how I have an interpretation, an assumption about how God will fulfill that promise? And what a mistake it would be for you and for me to assume that our understanding of God's providential care in our lives will always play out the way we think is best. But David was so wise, he didn't make the mistake of wrapping his faith around his hopes and dreams. And even with his flaws and faults and failures, he knew better than to confuse the working out of his hopes and dreams with God's promise to be with him and for him. You see the difference? Again, dreams that don't come true say nothing about God's faithfulness, his goodness, or his activity in your life. Plans that don't work out the way you hope say nothing about God's faithfulness and activity in your life. Nothing. David could say, I know how I want things to turn out. I know how I hope things will go. I know how I've prayed that they will go. I know how I thought for sure, I knew for certain how they would go. But if they don't go that way, then Lord, do to me whatever seems good to you, and I will praise you for it. I wonder, can you pray that way? Wherever you are right now, whatever you're going through right now, whatever hopes you had, whatever dreams that you might have had, now you're realizing, I didn't think I'd be here in this season of my life. They're not coming true. They can't come true now. Can you say, I might lose my world, but by God's grace, I will not lose my confidence in God. I will not throw away my faith in God. Because you see, that's a very real possibility. I've seen it way too many times. It's one of the main reasons people walk away from their faith and walk away from church and Christianity, because there's something in every one of us that says, well, if this is going to be the way it is, then I'm done. If this is the way God's not going to work in my life, then forget it. I'll just do whatever I want. And there's something inside of us that there's that temptation to jettison our faith and to jettison our integrity and to throw away our character and just do whatever we want to do to break all the rules and go out and party our brains out because we think, well, what benefit is there in being faithful to God if he won't fix the mess that I'm in? And I know I made the mess, but still he could do something about it. And listen, I understand that feeling. I mean, some of you lost your world. You lost your identity. You lost what was important to you. Somebody ran you out of your own kingdom. Somebody ran you out of your own family, your own business, your own inheritance, or whatever it is that you thought you had coming to you. And maybe you lost everything because of somebody else's poor choice. Or maybe it was because of your own poor choice. But again, we still struggle because we think, well, God could fix it, right? He could fix it. He could make things good again. I mean, I said I was sorry. What else do you want from me, God? Fix it. I get it. It's hard to maintain faith in a sovereign God who allows bad things to happen but will not fix them, even when we're the cause of what's happened. But after all, he's God, right? He could make it better. That brings a lot of pain in your life. And you have an option. Some of you have an option that you got to deal with pretty quickly because you're right in the middle of this, but you got an option. The option is you can let the raging river of your emotions sweep you into self-destructive behaviors and self-destructive relationships. Or like David, like Joseph, like Mary, the mother of Jesus, and like so many other Bible characters, you can say, I don't like what's going on. But God, do to me whatever seems good to you. There are people here who've lost spouses but didn't lose faith. There are people who have lost children but they didn't lose faith. There are people who have lost important relationships and inheritances and jobs and hopes and dreams of what could be and should be. There are people who have lost all those things and more, but they didn't lose their faith. I've stood beside the bedsides of dying people. I've visited with people who've received the gut-wrenching terminal diagnosis. I've wept with people who've lost a child. I've walked with people through heartbreaking divorce. I've listened to people who have messed up so badly that they lost their families and lost their jobs and their retirements. And listen, I've never met a person who thrived in those kind of awful circumstances. I've never met a man or woman who was able to walk through the fire like that. When all their dreams are shattered. I've never met a person that went through that and came out the other side with their faith intact who did not come to the point where they were able to say and willing to say, God, do to me whatever seems good to you. Not my will, but your will be done. Now, that's not fatalism, and it's not whatever. It's not resignation. Well, whatever will be, will be. No, this is faith in a sovereign God who knows what's best, who dispenses his discipline in keeping with what he knows will grow our hearts so that they'll be more centered on him. You see, on that day down by the river, David saw what was happening for what it was, and he said, I am not going to try to take charge and make things happen my way. Send the ark back, and if God chooses to return me to Jerusalem, so be it. But if he chooses to not return me to Jerusalem, so be it. I'm trusting in the sovereignty of God. I'm casting my faith on his sovereignty, and I'm asking God to do to me whatever he knows is best. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that exactly what Jesus did? I mean, he walked up the same Mount of Olives as David did that day, and he went into a garden, and he knelt down and he prayed, God, if there is any way you could accomplish your plan without me going to the cross, Father, would you let this cup pass from me? But then he said, but if not my will, but your will be done. Jesus is our model.